So welcome to Bexley Community Conversations. I'm really excited for today's conversation. We have Capitol Music professor Tom Zugger with us, and we started Bexley Connect in the fall of 2019, and over 350 Bexley residents offered to share their expertise and their experience with our students. And Tom Zugger was one of them. And as I read through the profiles on Bexley Connect, one thing stood out to me because I asked about people's personal interests and hobbies. And Tom Zugger indicated that he had run over 75 marathons, including he had run a marathon in every single state in the country. And I thought, well, that is outrageous. That's an audacious goal to say I want to try to run one marathon, to say I want to run 50 marathons, huge goal. To say I want to do it in every different state in the country is just, I felt like this is an interesting guy who I want to get to know. And what I got to know more about him is that Tom, in addition to being a runner who's done some amazing out there on the trails and on the streets, is also an amazing musician. He's performed with traveling Broadway shows. He's performed with the two most famous Barrys ever. He's performed with Barry White and Barry Manilow. And I think the most important thing is that Tom has actually played as a performer in a backing band behind Aretha Franklin. So to me, like, I don't really know what's better than that. But Tom, we're really excited to have you join the conversation today. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you. Very excited to tell a little bit about what I did, and then hopefully chat a little bit about it as we go.
So maybe marathoning. Were you a runner when you were in school? Did you run cross country or anything like that?
I didn't. That's the thing. It's so in terms of speed, I wouldn't think that I'm not going to win any medals for it. I played sports in high school. I played football and I wrestled. And I had some injuries to my neck, so I took up golf, which I still play today. But I didn't start actually running until I was in my mid-20s. And it was the kind of thing I did just for relaxation. I was not looking for an event or anything like that. And I remember vividly the first time I ran 3 minutes without stopping, which seems incredibly small, but it was a huge moment for me. So running is a little bit like becoming a musician in that you have to practice it every day. Physical activities, unlike strictly intellectual activities, it's better to do them a little bit every day than to try to wait for 5 days and then cram it all into your brain at the end. Well, in a physical way, it's impossible to do that. So I'd been on a routine as a musician of practicing each day, and then running sort of fell into that same pattern for me. So, but I think it's
as a young man, as a young person, were you like really goal oriented, even like in some other way besides running when you were in school? Because I'm thinking about, like, is this a personality trait that has always been with you? Like, you always were setting big goals for yourself and moving forward, or did this really kick in when you started running?
I'd always wanted to be a musician, and I always wanted to play, but I didn't have a finite goal to it. And so I let my career sort of follow whatever opened up, instead of I'm going to do this, then this, then this, then this. Running was a structure for me that I didn't have. And also, and this is interesting because I don't talk about my running a lot at school, but students know I do, so they ask me about it. For me, running is more mental health than it is physical health now. So many of the students at Capitol struggle with anxiety, depression, stress. I am an afternoon runner, which is also rare. I go through my whole day and then I run to relieve all the stress of the day and then have dinner and have time with the family. Many runners are early morning runners, and I'm not early morning anything. I'm a musician, so I prefer the evenings much more. But I found it to be my time to think. Many runners use headphones and listen to music, which I think is great, but music for me is work. So I don't listen to music when I run. I just run and think about all the things I have to do and how to get them done, and maybe some new ideas to finish them. And that makes it a lot easier to go through the process for me. And the miles sort of go by without me noticing it.
So you're a guy who's running 3 minutes and you're like, wow, I ran for 3 minutes. Like at that, I mean, how early did you think like, I think like this could become something I really want to throw myself into? Because I mean, committing yourself to just being able to run for 3 minutes without stopping is it's a pretty early starting point.
Yes, it is. Um, I was, when that happened, I would say I was 25. So for the next 4 or 5 years, I was either on the road or I did a couple of years of public school teaching as well. I was running just little bits and pieces. After about 5 years, I entered my first 10-mile race and I finished it. And I thought, oh, this is pretty cool. And that was around the 1996 Olympics. And I'd always been fascinated by the marathon in the Olympics. I don't know why. I just seeing them come into the stadium after running that far was just beyond comprehension to me. So I thought, well, maybe I should try something a little longer. So I went for a half marathon and I finished that. And then when I was 30, just before I turned 35, actually just before I turned 34, I entered the Columbus Marathon and I didn't finish.
So what happened?
Well, I thought I trained enough and I hadn't. And I also learned to figure out the hard way the difference between good pain and bad pain, and pushing myself too far. So I had some physical therapy after that.
So this is interesting because you're 34 years old. You've never run a marathon. You try your first marathon. It doesn't go well.
Doesn't go well.
I mean, this seems like this would be the kind of ideal place to say, maybe this was a bad idea and I shouldn't do this.
Right.
You have that thought or that conversation in your head?
I wondered it. I will say one part of my personality has always been, and I think many type A people, many of the students I teach who are musicians or are type A, the single most powerful motivation is someone telling you you can't do it. And so that was sort of that piece of that. So I was like, okay, now that this has happened once, I know I see a problem. I can learn from it. I'm going to do this again next year. And
So this is,
so
I want to kind of just crystallize that point you made, because I think this is really important. When people fail, I mean, we talk a lot about failure now, and I think there's a recognition that giving students an opportunity to fail is important because we learn from failure. But oftentimes failure can be discouraging and can cause people to shut down. And so you're kind of delineating this kind of choice that we have to make when we fail, which is the choice between saying, I failed, I'm not good, I can't do this, and being sparked or fueled by our failure to say, oh, you think I can't do this? Well, watch me bounce back. And I think that kind of mindset is really important.
And it's sometimes harder if you fail publicly. I think that's one of the, I'm standing on side of the road at mile 21 and I can't go any farther. People are going by and they're like, oh, just gut it out. And I'm like, well, yeah, except there seems like there's something like a knife stuck in the side of my leg right now. So I don't know if that's a good idea. Well, maybe I'll limp to this next car. And then I did that for a few cars. And then somebody finally came by who said, yeah, you don't look good. I think you should stop. So there is a public failure part of this that is challenging, I think. And it's, one of my favorite quotes is, and I'm going to have to paraphrase it because I don't have it written down. But I had it on my bulletin board for a while, and I've been reminded of it by the Last Dance Michael Jordan thing that's on, and it's he says something to the effect of, I've missed like 10,000 shots. I've lost 300 games. 40 times I've been asked to take the last shot of the game and I've missed it. I failed over and over again, and that's why I succeed. And I was like, that is so cool, because it's easy to think that when you fail, it's an end, but it's usually a beginning of something else.
So you have this failure, you do your physical therapy, and you're probably at this point, you're not thinking about running 50 marathons in 50 states. You're thinking, try to run another marathon at some point. The
I'm gonna
Columbus
get one. Yes, I'm gonna see what this feels like.
Yeah. And
And so
so,
I finished the first one the next November, and it's a powerful experience, because it's achieving a goal, which anytime you do that is a very emotional experience. But you're also dealing with the fact that you've had adrenaline coursing through you for, in this case, 4 hours and 45 minutes. You've completely drained your body. So you end up feeling this amazing euphoria and exhaustion simultaneously.
I wonder if the fact that you had failed the first time made succeeding the second time more sweet than if you had just been able to run it successfully the first time.
I think so. I've had that musically. There have been times when I've tried to play something publicly and it didn't go as well as I want. And then the second or third time when I finally got it, yeah, there's a degree of self-gratification that you didn't stop, that you kept pushing. And one of the music can be, and a lot of the things we do, it can be challenging because if you push, sometimes that makes it worse. What I like about running is the simplicity of pushing is we all can do this. And basically a marathon is left foot, left foot, repeat. That's it. Now the speed with which you do that doesn't really matter. Nobody asks you how long it took. They're just like, wow, you finished a marathon. You can take 6 hours. Doesn't matter. You finish it. And that's one of the other things I love about it. So that idea of pushing without hurting yourself, it's very simple. It's a very simple thing to do. It's not easy, because simple and easy are not synonyms, but it's simple. It's walking, it's running. And once I did it the first time, and a friend of mine told me this before I finished, he said, when you do your first marathon, you'll either say, I'm never doing that again, or you're going to be like, wow, I got to try that again. And my wife, who's the clarinet professor, has run 4, and she's done. She runs half marathons, and I ran my first one, and I was like, this is it. I got to keep doing this. Now
And
that
so,
part of it, I don't know why.
yeah, I mean, so some of that may be like the runner's high experience, but some of that may be the experience of like accomplishing a big goal and feeling so satisfied that you accomplished the big goal that you wanted to have that feeling again.
Yes, and the other interesting part is after doing a marathon, for a good few months after it, I am more confident in my everyday world, because I can look at that. Every marathon is like a microcosm of life. None of them have ever gone without a problem. Some of the problems have been astronomical and humorous at times. They never go as predicted. There are things you can't control in it. And so there's an emotional roller coaster in that 4-hour block every single time. Just like there is in life, in a school year, in a project. There's the excitement when you start, but if you go too fast, you're in trouble. There's a little bit of a letdown when you get into the middle. There's a part about 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through where you're just like, I can't do this anymore. I just have to keep going. And then there's that about 4 miles from the end where you're like, I think I can make it. Even if I have to walk, I think I can finish this project. And then finally making it. And even after 74 times, it's the same process. It's the same highs and lows. And I feel that when I'm preparing for a recital or a concert. And so it gives me something to fall back on when I'm in my time as a musician or a leader or a teacher at Capitol, to feel all those moments and to recognize that's the same thing the students are feeling. Or yes, that's the same thing the faculty are feeling trying to move online. This is like mile 17. Now you're telling me I have to do it for another year. Okay, now what did I tell myself to motivate myself there? How can I motivate others? So it's kind of a learning tool for me as well.
And that's really
And
powerful. I think, for people who are on the call or who are listening, it may not be running for you. Maybe you say, I want to write a book, or I want to, build a website, or I want to, create an art exhibition and display it publicly, or it could be a thousand different things, but this idea of setting some big goal that you're going to like work through and know that you're going to run into barriers, that know that you're going to want to quit at times, know that you're going to struggle, and getting through the end of it, that kind of teaches you that the process that can then be applied to other aspects of your life.
There's an interesting thing that happened along the way for me as well. In addition to all the weird things that happen, as an example, when I was running one in Rochester, a runner in front of me accidentally disrupted a beehive. And so this is, mile 14 or something. So I got stung by a couple bees. And of course I sped up quite a bit going through that area. Weird things like that you can't predict. Rainstorms. I made the mistake once, and this is, again, it's a learning experience. So I think I try to look at life that way, that it's not oh my gosh, I'm failed. I'm never going to figure this out. There was a point where I got near the end of the states where they were all out west. And of course, the states out west are much bigger. It takes a long time to get there. It's more expensive. I'm in education. So what we did was we would go out and I would run one on Sunday, and then we'd vacation for a week, and then I'd run one the next Sunday. So I run 2 marathons a week apart. So the first time went great. I went to Salt Lake City and then up to Idaho. The second time was in Denver. And so logic me, I said, well, Denver's at 5,000 feet. We got to go out a little bit early. Perfect. We went out early, finished the marathon about 4 hours and 20 minutes, and we drove to Wyoming. Well, illogical me thought that if going from 600 feet to 5,200 feet was okay, then going from 5,200 feet to 9,000, that should be fine too. Yeah, not so much. I walked a lot of that one. So, I learned something about elevation.
Yes. So Tom, how did you go from, you completed your first marathon, you're like, I love this, I want to do this again. When did the idea of saying, okay, 50 in 50 states, like how did you get from like, I want to do a second marathon to like, I want to set this kind of audacious goal of doing a marathon in every state in the country?
That took a while. I think I ran probably close to 10 to 12 marathons over the next 3.5, 4 years, without even really thinking about that. I started to get, and I was moving into my later 30s at that point, and I started to get a little bit slower. I wasn't hitting the PR time anymore. And I realized that that was something that I was not going to be able to change. There's something called a max volume of oxygen that we can take in, transfer into the bloodstream, and exhale carbon dioxide. And your amazing athletes have this huge high range of it. And then us normal people have a lower amount of that. Well, that peaks in your late 20s. The reason you can have great athletes into their 30s is because they are intellectually and mentally still stronger than they were in their late 20s and more mature about how they work, even though their maximum volume of oxygen has come down ever so slightly. But as you get into your late 30s, that's why you see all these athletes finally going off the proverbial performance cliff, because you hit that point. So I was like, well, if I'm going to keep running these, what could be another goal? And that, I don't know what started it, But then I realized that I had about 4 states. So I started thinking, well, let's use this as vacation and we'll just go to different places and run marathons. Um, Once I got to about 15 states, that's when it really started to morph into something huge. And interesting, once I reached halfway, um, that's a big milestone, halfway through any project. But then all of a sudden around 30, 31, things happened in our life. Our son was born, my job changed. All of a sudden the frequency of marathons started to get less and less. And so the pace of change started to crawl a little bit, much like it does in any project. And I began to wonder, well, maybe I'm not going to finish this. Um, and those were the tough times. Those were the mentally tough times where there wasn't time to get out and run, to be in shape. There wasn't time to get away to do a marathon. So I was getting maybe 1 or 2 a year. And so the pace slowed down and made it more challenging.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing because on one hand, I think it's really impressive to set a big goal and to pursue it and achieve it and feel that sense of accomplishment. Um, and then I also think there's that kind of pressure we put on ourselves where we feel like we're a failure if we don't do it. I thought this was important. Like, do you at any point think maybe this is okay if I don't do this, or were you like, I won't feel complete unless I accomplish this goal? Because I think, it's like, do we give ourselves an out at a certain point, or is that a mistake to ever give ourselves an out? We have to pursue something. When do we give ourselves permission to like move on from a goal?
Right. I I didn't do it in the general sense of the 50 states, but I will tell you, I did every time I was on the starting line. I would tell myself, you did all this work to get here. If it doesn't go okay today, if you only get 18 miles, you started. You gave yourself the chance. That's great. And then interestingly, there were a few where I had to fly myself because of cost. So you're spending now a couple $1,000s to fly out to New Mexico. So pressure then becomes, wow, I've spent all this money. What happens if I don't finish? I have to spend all this money to go back. And again, I had to talk myself off of that. Like, look, if this is important, we'll go back. I made it out here. I'm going to start. We'll see where it goes. And there were a couple I did not finish. And both of them provided a learning opportunity, which made it easier for the next time I did a marathon. And both of them actually, if you think about the states you'd like to visit, were not in the top 10 to go back to twice. But each time something happened the second time, which was almost worth the fact that I didn't make the first one. So an unexpected bonus, if you will. So I ran in Brookings in South Dakota, and it poured, and it poured, and it poured. And I was wearing regular running clothing, which is supposed to be waterproof, but everything has a point. If you're out running today, I don't care if your stuff is waterproof, it's not going to matter. And it was cold, and I cramped up, and I couldn't finish. My legs just I couldn't move anymore. And that was at 22 miles, which you're thinking you can walk in. I couldn't even walk. So I learned from that you can wear a poncho running, and it keeps you very warm and dry. And then a few years later in College Station, it poured the whole time, and I had no problem. But the interesting part of that one is that out of defeat came an opportunity that I never would have had otherwise. So there's another one on the other side of the state called Deadwood Mickelson Trail. And about a week before the race director called me and he said, hey, I noticed when you sent in your registration, you had music listed on your bio, my tag from my email. And I said, yeah. He said, you play? And I said, yes, I'm a trombone player. He said, well, we just partnered with 2 air bases in Afghanistan, and they're going to do the virtual race with us at the same time, but we hadn't planned for a national anthem. Would you be willing to play the national anthem and then run the race? Well, we were driving out, so I was like, sure, I'll throw the trombone. And so they had a couple cameras there, and they had a screen, and you could see all the military who were standing at attention, and then all the folks for the marathon. And here I am standing in the middle of the road dressed like a runner with my trombone, which actually, this is one of the ones I downloaded.
So as you're pulling up the screen, I love as you're talking about this, because it seems like every time you hit an obstacle, every time you fail, the story always ends with some positive spin. It always ends with, I learned this thing, I gained this. And I think there's something really profound and important for all of us to take from this, which is kind of recasting our failures as opportunities to learn, to grow, to have new possibilities. And I think that's probably one of the great secrets of people who have tremendous success in life.
And it's not easy. I will readily admit, as a musician, I find it very challenging to put myself out there. And I worry, as a 56-year-old guy, wonder what those people in the audience are thinking of me when I miss this note. You'd think I'd change after 56 years, but I haven't. I still have that worry. I just put it in a compartment because I have to believe that what I'm doing is worthwhile, and put myself out there. And sometimes you get these added bonuses. That is one of the highlights of my musical career, which seems kind of silly because it's standing in the middle of the road in rain playing a national anthem. But if you could see the people in Afghanistan when you were playing it, you were like, wow, this is meaningful. And if I hadn't failed the first time, I never would have gone to this race, because I went there because I still needed South Dakota of all the things, it's so. Yeah, there's a door open there that I never would have noticed.
That's awesome. You want to show us? I know you got some other images you want to share with us from your.
There's yes. This is one that I'm going to bring it up. So I have three here, and there's one story for the last one, which is, this is what you get at the end. I'm a certified completed marathoner, because nowadays, from 2000 on, they chronicle all your times, which is kind of cool.
So just to pull back, is this like a thing? Is this like the 50 state club, like people on who's certified? Who's in charge of the 50?
There is actually a 50 state club, which I found I had probably 30 states by the time I started looking for that. And you pay dues, and they help you out with some travel ideas and good marathons and bad marathons. And I was the 1,541st person to finish. Which I'm still kind of astounded. I'm just a regular guy. None of my races, as I've gotten older, I've started to do pretty well. I've actually finished first in my age group as I've gotten older. But in terms of speed, I'm not amazingly fast by any stretch, and I'm certainly not a world-class athlete. It's more of the tortoise versus the hare. I just kept running, and that is the piece that I think is so powerful me about doing it, because it's just the same as I go through in everyday life. I just keep running. I just keep pushing back against all these things. What's this marathon going to throw at me? The fire alarm goes off in the hotel the night before. Is it elevation? Is it cold? There was one in Mississippi I signed up for, and it turned out to be 13 degrees. I had to go to a running store there and buy extra clothing. So it's always something thrown at me about it. And the other one that here has a story about.
Again, one of the things I think is interesting about that is that you have now put yourself out enough that you recognize there will be obstacles. So when they come up, you're not like, oh, this ruins everything. You're like, what will the obstacle be and how will I respond to it? So you're almost prepared for sort of the barriers to come up, as opposed to having them feel like, oh, how am I going to solve this? It's like, it's a puzzle that is coming. You don't know what shape it's going to be, and you're going to be able to respond to it somehow.
Exactly. And I think in my own world, it's helped me be less of a procrastinator because I'm assuming something will go wrong. And occasionally it doesn't. Occasionally the logistics go great. I arrive, I run the marathon. I'm always sore, um, but those are the rarities. So I'm always trying to think of what might go wrong, and that spilled over into the rest of my life. So as I'm preparing for a speech, as I'm preparing for a lesson, as I'm preparing to speak to the faculty, I'm thinking, okay, what are the questions they're going to have? Okay, does my technology work? Have I double checked it? I become much more proactive about that because I've seen so many things thrown in front of me that I never would have thought are possible, that the unexpected became more normal. If that makes, does that make sense? Is, you know, a way to, so there's some of the medals I have. The giant one, which is kind of funny, it's for Little Rock. When we went to Little Rock, it was supposed to be the greatest race ever. It was an okay race. What was interesting about it is a thunderstorm blew through at about the 24-mile mark, and they canceled the race. So we didn't have a choice. Some people finished anyway. I chose not to because I didn't want the volunteers to be out there because it was dangerous. There was lightning, you know, all that sort of stuff. So, but then again, the next time I went back to Arkansas, I was the first time I ever achieved a place in my age group. I finished third place in my age group when I went back. And again, I wouldn't have gone back if they hadn't canceled the marathon. So little things like that. And then the last picture is kind of one of those that if you're ever too much into your goal, somebody will let you know that, yeah, you're getting too obsessed about it. So I was at 48 states and I flew to Hawaii alone over uh, Martin Luther King weekend, January 2018. And I'm spending a lot of money and I've got to finish this marathon. It's the only thing I'm focused on. And the next morning at 8:03, this is the text that I received. Yes, I was in Hawaii 3 days and I happened to be there, if you remember, for the false alarm ballistic missile. So the interesting part about this is I'm across the street from the largest resorts I've ever seen. There's probably 3,000 hotel rooms. And since it's 8 in the morning on a Saturday, most people had their phones on vibrate. Well, if you get, I'm going to guess, 15,000 or 20,000 phones vibrating at the same time, from a distance, it sounds like the most bizarre, insidious group of bees you've ever heard. And then there was a moment of silence, and then all heck broke loose. The air raid sirens did go off on Maui, where I was. Car horns, police sirens. And so for the next, I'm going to say probably 2 minutes, I'm thinking, well, if this is true, how do I call my wife and tell my child that I'm never going to see him again? And what has my life been worth? You know, it's amazing how fast your brain can work to go through those type of questions in an incredibly short amount of time. So by about 2 minutes after that, I started thinking, well, I'm going to go online and see if there's anything, and there was nothing there. Then you start to, okay, you come down a little bit and you're like, well, maybe it's a false alarm. Or you're thinking, well, I've never been to Hawaii. Are we so isolated that nobody knows what's going on here? But after about 5 or 6 minutes, you realize that, okay, nothing is happening. It seems like it's a little strange. So about 20 minutes later, 25 minutes later, we finally got the okay from that it was a false alarm from the senator from Hawaii who texted out. So I called my wife and explained what happened. And you'd think running your 49th marathon would be this huge moment. But it was the next day, I was like, if I don't finish, it's really okay. All of a sudden, the idea of perspective had been completely shifted. What I thought was the most important thing in my life no longer was. I had to finish this 49th stage. No, I just want to get home to my wife and child. I'm glad I'm alive. So I don't know if that's, fate that happened that made me, because a lot of times in life, we get these moments, and unfortunately, it's usually the passing of friends, acquaintances, parents, and there's no warning. You don't get to be like, oh yeah, I should have taken this more seriously. I should have been closer to these people. They're gone. And here I was getting this as a warning. I would cheerfully have not gone through it, but it's something that I've learned from that point, that every time I line up for a marathon before then, I would think, well, I hope I can finish. What happens if I don't? And now it's just, hey, I made it to the starting line. I'm still running these. Whatever happens today, we're okay.
Tom, I really like that story because in a way it reminds us that when we set these big goals, when we try to accomplish big things, they seem like the most important thing in the world. But in the end, it's really kind of a game that we're playing. We're trying to create meaning in our life. We're trying to do something that's going to animate our lives and make us feel excited to get up and that we're concerned about. But it's not like the world ends, or lives or dies based on whether we finish our 50th marathon or not, or whether we
Exactly.
read this book or not. We do it. It excites us. It's meaningful. But in the end, it's more just a creation that we make for ourselves that enables us to be excited or find meaning or just animate our lives in some way that makes it extraordinary rather than ordinary.
And as I've done these, I've realized that as much as I've learned to do them and to run and the metaphors that have connected to the rest of my life, the best part I've had about this has been the number of students who started to exercise and run at Capitol. And now that's part of their life and part of their mental and emotional well-being. They aren't doing it to be fast. They're doing it to relax. They're doing it to feel good. And so I'm able to pass that on to others. So it's an interesting process. And I will readily admit, as a high school and college student, everything I did was about what is in it for me. My playing was about what is in it for me. I mean, my music was about what is in it for me. And as I've become older, I've become much more, and I enjoy much more giving that back to others. I don't think there's anything wrong with being selfish when we're younger because we're working on ourselves. And I find when I run, I still work on myself. And so that idea of working on yourself can be sedentary. It can be sitting and meditating. It can be walking on a trail in a metro park. It can be walking home with your own thoughts. We all need that time to build who we are. And then we can share, as we build who we are, we start sharing that with others. And I think that's something that a marathon has done for me as well.
I think that's a great point too, because we don't always have to win. It's like you've run a marathon in every one of the 50 states. There's probably somebody who's run 2 marathons in every 50 state, or somebody 50 ultra marathons, or somebody who's run a marathon in every country in the world. I mean, at some point, it's not about being better than you. Could set a goal to say, I want to do a hike in every single Columbus metro park. I keep thinking about this summer and like, what are we going to do? It's so, you can't get a job because everybody's unemployed. You can't. Well, I mean, you could say, I'm going to try to set a goal of I'm going to go for a hike in every metro park in Columbus. You set up that map, you chart them off, you go one at a time. And by the time you're done, you've done that. And if you want to take it to the next level, maybe you blog about it. So you create a blog about like my walk through every metro park in Columbus. It doesn't have to be about being better than someone else or over accomplishing something. It's just something about like, what can I do that's going to animate my summer, that's going to make me excited to get up and accomplish something.
Yeah.
That's great. I know this has been such an interesting conversation. Students, I want to make sure you have an opportunity. if you have questions. So if anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask a question of Tom, you can do that right now. And if you don't want to unmute yourself, if you want to type a question into the chat bar, you're welcome to do that as well. I'm sure that this is a conversation that could last a long time, but I know we have an hour. So if there's something that we haven't talked about that you're curious about, let me give a pause right now in case somebody wants to unmute and ask a question. And if not, we'll keep it going. So Tom, you told us about the 49th in Hawaii. What was the 50th?
We went back to where we honeymooned, which was Alaska. And I ran the Anchorage Marathon, which, you know, you're at the 50th one, you're like, okay, I can crawl, I'll finish, no problem. I'm standing at the starting line, and the race director comes out. He says, okay, have a great time. He says, oh, by the way, there's been a lot of bear activity. So if you see a black bear, oh, God.
That'll turn a marathon into a sprint, I guess, wouldn't it?
So believe it or not, about 8 miles in, I come around the corner and everybody's stopped and waving their arms. There's a bear cub in the middle of the path. I'm like, I can't win. So there's always something.
So Sydney is interested about mental blocks. And, you know, it's like we all have this running conversation in our head that's like, oh, this isn't going to work. You can't do this. Like, you know, I want to quit. Like, as you hit you know, mental blocks in this process, like, how do you respond to those? How do you get over those mental blocks?
In a particular marathon, I developed a tool that is, because my mind is doing the same thing. It's saying, oh, you don't feel good. Oh, do you feel that? Did you notice that? Oh, I don't know. That's it. It's this, you know, da 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 da. So I've developed this after about the first 6 or 7 miles, where I take account of how I feel, and I'm like, okay, I don't feel too bad. I hope I feel like this at measure or at mile 21, or at mile 16, or at mile 13. So then I check back in at mile 13, and I'm like, oh, I feel okay. Let's see how I feel at mile 16. So I'm taking the pulse of my body, and that sort of walks me through it as I get from point to point. And then as I get towards the end, I start looking at it as 2-mile runs. And so I know exactly what 2 miles is by my house. So I'm picturing going from 18 to 20, running up past Gahanna Middle School, around the corner, and then turning around and coming back. And I allow myself to think of it in these smaller chunks. And the further I get, the smaller the chunks get.
So instead of like thinking, oh, I've got to run 8 more miles, how am I going to do that? You think, I'm just doing a 2-mile run right now. And then doing a 1-mile run right now. I'm just going to run another half mile. And so by breaking that down, you break down that voice that tells you can't do 8 miles right now. You're like, I don't have to. I'm just going to do 2.
Yeah, exactly. And the other trick I use all the time is I only count to 25. Because if I make it to 25, I can walk in. And then I usually say that. I was like, okay, you made it to 25, you can walk in from here. And then I hardly ever do.
Yeah.
And I actually use that same tool to get out every day. So it'll be, you know, I really don't feel like getting out. So I'll make deals with myself. Say, look, if you go out today, just walk. I don't think it's ever happened. But once I get it, because once you get out, it's the hardest step is that first one.
Yeah.
Once I get out the door and I do a half a mile, it's like, oh yeah, I'm glad I'm out here. Getting out there is probably the hardest part. So if I have a set amount where it's you have to run 8 miles today, that's not going to work for me. I have to let it be organic and say, you need to go out today. If it feels really good, it'll be 8. If it feels okay, it'll be 5. If it feels terrible, it'll be 3, but you're going to go out. And that way I'm making a deal with myself that you make that first step, you get out the door, and then we'll take it from there.
That's great. Yeah, there's great advice. Shayna is curious about your favorite marathon. What was the most memorable, the most fun, the one that you enjoyed the most?
There are a couple of them. The Timberline Marathon in Oregon, it was a trail marathon, which I did not realize meant you were going over down trees and up the sides of shale cliffs and things. That was a little interesting, but I ended up finishing first in my age group. My wife said it's because everyone over the age of 50 besides me was smart enough not to do it.
So sometimes that's the power, is just showing up.
Yeah, exactly. The Navajo marathon, the Shiprock Marathon in New Mexico, where I got to meet a real live World War II code talker at the end of the marathon, was very cool. In terms of beauty, probably the one in Minnesota along Lake Superior was probably the most beautiful.
Fantastic. So Zach has an interesting question. He's asking, do you feel like that you view yourself differently having finished the 50 marathons? Has it changed your self-concept or your sense of like who you are, what you're capable of? How would you respond to that?
The moment of finishing did not change it, but the process from probably state number 5 to state number 50, yes, I became much more comfortable as me. And that seems like a simplistic thing, but it's something I found to be very challenging. It was very challenging. I was trying to be someone I wasn't when I was younger. And I think a lot of us try to do that. I'm much more comfortable going through this process with what I can and what I can't do, and being me and being genuine. Um, it's humbling to not finish, and that's okay when you learn from it. It's also humbling, and this is a big topic nowadays. I was brought up in a generation that males do not cry. I will tell you, it's almost physically impossible not to cry after finishing a marathon because of the emotional and physiological changes you've gone through. And I've run 350-milers as well. And after those, all bets are off. You're a basket case. And I'm okay with that. And I see pro athletes doing it now, and I can actually, in a very small way, I can feel what they're feeling. I can't explain it. It's an amazing feeling, but it's helped me to become more comfortable with being who I am. And that's why I liked the process so much. I don't think it has to be running by any stretch of the imagination, but any sort of process you go through to complete something, I think helps you learn about yourself, and when you finish it, you become more comfortable with who you are. And I think that's a really important element of our society we don't talk about as much as maybe we should.
Yeah, there's a real sense of empowerment and sense of like, I can accomplish things. If I could do this, as you talked about, if I could do this, I could do that. I can apply this to other parts of my life. And there's something very empowering about setting a goal, accomplishing it, and then recognizing your own power to do the things you set out to do.
Right. Absolutely.
So we only have like a handful of minutes left. I want to give, if there are other questions you want to type in, please do that. Tom, it's been so interesting talking with you. I think, going from like, I got to try to run 3 minutes to I'm going to run 50 marathons in 50 states is a, and especially not even starting until you're in your 30s. This is not something that you were, it's like you knocked off 20 or 25 of them while you were in your 20s and, young and without a family, energetic, and at your physical peak. I'd like to invite the students and other guests who are on the call to just take a moment to think about, what did you learn from Tom in this conversation today that was important to you, that was meaningful? What's a lesson you're going to carry with you? What's something that has been helpful for you? And I would love, because Tom gave an hour of his time today to talk with us, I would love it if each of you would consider sharing something that you gained from the conversation, just as a way of thanking him for making time for us. And I would particularly love if you wanted to unmute and turn on your video and say something to him directly, if you're comfortable doing that. And if you're more comfortable, if you want to type something in the chat bar, you could do that as well. So take a minute to think, what did you hear from Tom today that was like, that was important, that was meaningful, that was thought-provoking, that was something I want to bring to my own life, or that's something that I'm inspired to do because of the conversation? And somebody want to jump in? And Rosa, I see you unmuted. Rosa, you want to take the first shot?
Sure. Why not? Okay. So I found it interesting that when you were talking about how you broke down the last sections of like your marathon into like doing it in just like smaller chunks, like incrementally, with the like, okay, well, I don't need to run 8 miles, I need to run 2 miles, and then maybe I'll do 2 miles 4 more times. I was doing a workout last night, and there I could like see how that like really like breaking it down kind of got me through, and how it like would get you through. And I'm like considering starting to run because I don't know when I'm going to be like allowed to go back to, you know, the gym.
Yeah.
Is usually I fight, and that's a very different kind of situation. So I thought that was very interesting.
Thanks, Rosa. I appreciate it. Thanks for being the courage of jumping in first.
Yes.
Looks like Zach has turned on his camera, which I'm guessing means he's got something to say.
Yeah, first I just want to say thank you for talking. It's been really interesting, and I was planning on running the Cap City Half Marathon in April, and unfortunately, obviously, that didn't happen. But I've kind of fallen off running a little bit since then, and you definitely re-inspired me to get back on it and make sure that I,
Great.
you know, do that and complete that goal, which I set out to. So thank you. Yeah,
it'll be great when you finish that half marathon. That feeling. And you feel like you can conquer the world. And I think that's a great feeling to have.
It's for sure. Any other students want to, or principals want to share something that you're carrying away from this conversation? I see while we're waiting for somebody else who might want to speak, Shayna said the Levin family does not want to be shown on screen, but they say thank you and really appreciate hearing how important it is to never give up. Yeah. So you not only inspired Shayna, but her whole family
right.
got a message from you. Thanks, Shayna.
So definitely kind of what Rosa said about breaking it down, but maybe also just kind of what you talked about just showing up on the starting line, and not this kind of all or nothing definition of success. It was very inspiring, and I think especially when you set big goals, you feel like you paint yourself into a corner about, I've either got to accomplish this amazing thing or I've accomplished nothing at all. And really there's a whole lot of shades of gray in life. So that was good thought.
If you can be proud of yourself for starting. Yeah. That's a incredibly hard lesson I'm still trying to learn, but I think it's very important.
Anyone else want to jump in? Well, I want to just say, Tom, this has been such an interesting conversation. And when I saw that you had run 50 marathons, and I thought, I got to meet this guy, totally live up to my expectations.
That's good.
Every bit as interesting of a conversation as I thought it was going to be. I hope that the students and others who are watching this felt a little bit of inspiration to set some big goals. I think, in Jason's point is well taken. It's not like you're a loser if you don't accomplish your big goals. It's okay. Sometimes just the setting of big goals gets you off the couch and into life, and that in itself is a win. And so hopefully you've inspired a lot of people with this talk to just put themselves out there and kind of feel their own power and their own sense of being alive, which is like, hey, we're here for a short time. We may as well really make our trip on on this earth something that's worth engaging. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you all for coming. Enjoyed it.